Morah today is only a mitzvah midrabanan. The mitzvah to eat morah in HaTorah biblically only applies when you have a Korban Pesach and you're eating the morah in conjunction with the Korban Pesach. We don't have a Korban Pesach today. Matzah is a dispute in the Talmud whether the mitzvah matzah applies biblically today or only rabbinically. So we paskin that the mitzvah matzah applies ben HaTorah, and the Gemara says, therefore, the mitzvah of Sipa Yitzias Mitzrayim, to tell the whole story of Yitzias Mitzrayim, applies ben HaTorah. The mitzvah of Sipa Yitzias Mitzrayim only applies. You have to be able to demonstrate. Either you shake a Korban Pesach, or you shake some morah, you shake some matzah. So the Korban Pesach doesn't exist today. The morah is only midirabbanan, and the fact that matzah exists min HaTorah enables us to fulfill the mitzvah of Sipa Yitzias Mitzrayim. So these are the two mitzvahs that we have in HaTorah on Pesach night, the matzah and the Sipa Yitzias Mitzrayim. The Sipa Yitzias Mitzrayim, it says in Shulchan Aruch, you have to say in English. It says in Shulchan Aruch. They quote, there were Bali HaTaisis who lived in England, and their wives and their children didn't understand Hebrew. And the whole idea of Sipa Yitzias Mitzrayim is to explain to the members of the household, to explain to the other people what happened. So you're not yoitze if you just read in Hebrew if they don't understand. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch you have to say Sipa Yitzias Mitzrayim in English. That says the Farish. In English. The matzah, the Mishnah records that the matzah has to be made from one of the 5 types of grain. Wheat, barley, oats, rice, spelt. That's the way we usually say. Lachatchila, more correct is, the minig is quoted from the Maharil. Maharil lived in Germany many years ago, many centuries ago. Maharil says, Lachatchila, she used dafke chitin, made from wheat. He doesn't give a reason, and the later commentaries try to fish around for a reason. Some people are allergic to wheat, so strictly speaking, you can use matzah made from any one of the 5 kinds of grain: wheat, barley, oats, rye, or spelt. So there are people who are allergic to wheat, so they're going to be allergic to spelt also. They're going to be allergic to the other things as well. Those who are allergic to wheat can only use oat matzahs because their allergy is caused because all of these 5 kinds of grain have one thing in common. They all have a certain percentage of gluten in them. And the gluten is what causes the chemical reaction of chimutz. The Gemara says it's only considered matzah if you would have left the flour sitting with the water long enough, it would have turned into chametz. It would have had a chemical reaction to turn it to chametz, and you didn't let it sit long enough. You kneaded it, and you baked it quickly, so then it has a status of matzah. But if you have such a flour, such a type of a flour that if you mix it with water, you let it sit all day long and it's not going to turn into chametz. So then if you baked it quickly, it's not called matzah. It's only called matzah if it's the opposite from chametz. So the Gemara says there are certain flours. Let's say you take rice flour, you take potato starch, and you mix it with water, so that the chemical reaction is what we call sirchon. That's not called chimutz. Only these 5 grains. The Gemara says the rabbis didn't have a tradition for the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. They didn't have halacha of Moshe Messina that it's only these 5 kinds of grain. They worked it out on their own. They figured it out. Whatever is boled chimutz is considered matzah. Whatever is not boled chimutz is not considered matzah. So here it's assumed in recent years it's assumed that the definition of this chemical reaction is if you have gluten in the grain, so then it's boled chimutz. The other kinds of flour don't have gluten, so it's not boled chimutz. So if one is allergic to wheat and he uses the oat matzahs instead, so the whole reason why he doesn't get sick by eating the oat matzahs is because they have a very low percentage of gluten. Very low percentage of gluten means that it's not boled chimutz. So by definition, it shouldn't be good. So they asked Rabbi Yashiv in Eretz Yisrael, what does he say? So he had to make an experiment. So they mixed oat flour with water, and he looked at it and he said, that's called chimutz. No problem, that's called chimutz. The problem is that they did it with Israeli oats. They don't make the matzahs from Israeli oats because Israeli oats, like American oats, have a higher percentage of gluten. They make the special matzahs for the people who are allergic to the wheat matzahs. They make it from British oats. The British oats is a different strain of oats, has a lower percentage of gluten. So it's really a question whether one is yotzei with these matzahs, but the oat matzahs. So therefore, whoever is not allergic to wheat should not use these oat matzahs. One who's allergic to wheat has no brera. So second best, let him use the oat matzahs and hope and pray that it is considered one of the 5 mini dogmas. But it's not so poshut. And now in New York it became popular They advertise in the Anglo-Jewish newspapers that they have available Sephardish matzahs. Ashkenazi matzahs are very brittle. They're like crackers, and you chew it. It's hard to chew. You got to have good teeth, and all the people that can't chew it have to soak it in water, and it's brittle and it falls apart when you chew it. Sephardish matzahs are very soft. It's like eating a cake. So some Ashkenazim enjoy eating these Sephardish matzahs. So there's a question whether this is in violation of the Ashkenazi minig. The Ramah and Shulchan Aruch records all of the Sukkim and all of the minhagim of the Ashkenazim. So the Ramah writes that our minig, the Ashkenazi minig, is that we eat small wafers, small matzahs, as opposed to very large matzahs. The Gemara says that the matzahs, based on the pasuk in Chumash, have to be lechem oni. How do you translate lechem oni? So the simple translation of the expression is lechem oni, the bread of affliction. When the Jews were suffering as slaves in Egypt, this is what they were eating. Lechem oni, affliction. The Gemara has an additional level of interpretation, lechem oni, that this is the bread that a poor man would eat. What does it mean a poor man would eat? So the Gemara says, as opposed to a gigantic, if it's a ashisha, if it's very big, if the matzah is too big, then it's matzah ashira. Or if you have egg matzahs, if you have other flavors mixed in, that's matzah ashira. So the Ramah says in Shulchan Aruch that the minig by the Ashkenazim is we eat small matzahs. The hand matzahs that we eat, those are considered small. If it would be gigantic, then you wouldn't be yotze with it. I personally don't think that the Ramah meant to say that it has to be dafke, the kind of matzahs that we use. If you use the Sephardish matzah, I don't think it's in violation of the Ashkenazi minig. The Ramah just meant to emphasize that it should be small in size as opposed to too large. But I don't think he meant that an Ashkenazi shouldn't use a Sephardish matzah. One who wants to use it, I think, is untehei. I don't think that's a problem. Regarding moror, the Mishnah lists off 5 different vegetables that are acceptable for moror, and the Shulchan Aruch quotes from the Talmud Yerushalmi that these were listed in descending order of importance. So more correct is to use the first one that's known as chazeres, and if that's not available, you use ulshin. If that's not available, you use tamcha, and so on and so forth. In descending order of importance, these 5. So the first of the 5 vegetables mentioned by the Mishnah is chazeres. So all of the Rishonim say chazeres is lettuce. That's what they all write. In all our languages, they all say lettuce. In the days of the Tanoim, regular lettuce, what we call in America iceberg lettuce, didn't exist in Eretz Yisrael. So the only kind of lettuce they had was romaine lettuce, what we call today romaine lettuce. So whoever uses romaine lettuce, that's number 1. That's the best, according to what it says in Shulchan Aruch. How in the world is romaine lettuce bitter? It doesn't taste bitter at all. What does it have to do with moror? So the Talmud Yerushalmi poses that question. Lettuce is not bitter. So Talmud Yerushalmi says, if you would leave it in the ground longer, if you wouldn't cut it off so early, then it would turn bitter. So the Chazon Ish interpreted the Yerushalmi to mean, yes, romaine lettuce is good. If you left it in the ground so long that it turned bitter, then it's a bitter herb. But if you cut it off earlier, like we do, we buy the lettuce, they cut it off before it became bitter. So the Chazon Ish says that's not acceptable. This Chazon Ish has not been accepted by most people. Most people assume that the pshat in the Yerushalmi is that since if one were to leave the romaine lettuce in the ground growing longer, it would turn bitter. So even if you detached it from the ground earlier, this is labeled as a bitter vegetable and you're yotze the mitzvah. Why should that be the best? Why should that be the mahadrid? It doesn't taste bitter at all. So the Yerushalmi says, no, that's reminiscent of the way the Shibud Mitzrayim took place. First it was very sweet, and then it became bitter. First, they said to the Jews, let's all work together, let's build all of these pyramids, let's build all the Ori Miskanas, Pisam Ramses, and so on. And everybody was working for the government. And then they decided to shift all the work on the Jews, and it became bitter. So just like the Golus Mitzrayim first started off as being sweet, and then it turned into a bitter experience, that we should use this kind of maror, which first starts off as something sweet, and then it becomes bitter. So that's why the Shulchan Aruch quotes from the Talmud Yerushalmi that this is the recommended type of vegetable. In the Middle Ages, not the Middle Ages, in the 1400s, it's already after the Middle Ages, in the 1400s, the locations where the Jews lived in Europe, this season of the year, before Pesach, the romaine lettuce wasn't available at all. So they developed a practice to start using horseradish. So it's really questionable because the horseradish is not really bitter, it's sharp. It's a different sensation. Sharp and bitter are two different things. let's say onions, are sharp, but they're not bitter. They're two different sensations. And furthermore, the Talmud points out, and the Shulchan Aruch quotes this, that one is only yotze if you eat that part of the vegetable, these 5 types of maror, that part of the vegetable that grows above the ground. If you eat the root of the vegetable, you're not yotze. So the whole horseradish, the whole thing is a root. So it's very questionable whether horseradish is acceptable or not. Those who started this practice to use the horseradish, they claim that that's the 3rd vegetable listed in the Mishnah. The first is chazeres, the second is ulshin, the third is tamcha. So the Magen Avraham in his commentary on the side of Shulchan Aruch says that the horseradish is assumed to be the identity of, we're not sure what these vegetables are. So he says we assume that the horseradish is the identity of the 3rd one. It's very difficult because when they started this practice of using horseradish, they point out that it's problematic. The Gemara says that all of the 5 vegetables are leafy vegetables. The horseradish basically is not a leafy vegetable. It has a couple of leaves growing above the ground, but people don't eat the leaves. You eat the root of the things. It's very questionable. I had a student in the yeshiva, must have been the same time as some of the participants here today. I had a student in the yeshiva who published an essay in the YU publication. They had a publication that was called Gesher. Hasn't come out in many years. Gesher is a bridge. This is the bridge to bridge the gap between science and halacha. So they had students and professors write essays about issues where there's a relationship or friction, whatever, between science and halacha. So this student wrote over 40 years ago the whole background of the whole horseradish story. And he says that he quotes from all of the poskim that it's really very questionable if you're yotze the mitzvah with horseradish. The student now lives in Eretz Yisrael. He's a professor in botany in Ben Gurion University, and he had his essay translated into Hebrew. So many people in Bnei Brak who don't know English, Bnei Brak and Meir Shorim, stopped using horseradish after they see what all the poskim say. It's really highly questionable. I used to learn Mecharusa with one of your local young men. Dr. Newberger, Naftali Newberger, and he lives in Brooklyn now. And he told me when he used to work he still works in a hospital in New York City, he said the 2 days of the year that the emergency ward has more Orthodox Jews than the rest of the year, the 2 nights of Pesach, when the Jews get sick from eating horseradish, or from drinking too much wine, or from eating too much matzah. That's Hashan den Acharpe. Pesach, we celebrate Zman Chereseinu. We celebrate our freedom, and then people get sick from eating things they're not allowed to eat. This is ridiculous. So the horseradish is very, very questionable if you're yotze the mitzvah with it. It's an ishke mitzvah to use the horseradish. Even if one should assume horseradish is the identity of the 3rd one of the 3 vegetables in the Mishnah, but the first one is the preferred one, and the first one we all know, all the Rishonim say, is romaine lettuce. They quote the Rav Baron Kotler felt that there wasn't that much of a difference between regular iceberg lettuce and romaine lettuce. He said that regular lettuce is the same thing to give yotze the mitzvah with regular lettuce. Rabbi Soloveitchik was not so convinced of that, so every year he would say, romaine lettuce, you should use romaine lettuce. Romaine lettuce, nish gefelach. You can eat the full kazayis. On the horseradish, there was an ongoing debate for years when the Jews used horseradish in Europe, so there was a major debate. Some of the poskim said you were only yotze if you eat a chunk of horseradish that was not ground up. You have to eat it when it's in its original state. If you grind it up, it's already nishtana, and if it's nishtana, it's considered like a new identity. Panu chadosh b'ol kan, you're not yotze. Others said pon fakir. It's abnormal to eat horseradish as a chunk of a vegetable. You're only yotze if you eat it chopped up. So we're not sure, even if you hold a horseradish is the correct vegetable. So you're supposed to eat a dafka if it's one chunk, or you're supposed to eat a dafka if it's ground up. So better is to leave the a lot of people say, how can you not have horseradish on the table? My father, my grandfather. So that's what I do. My wife buys the horseradish. In Washington Heights, it costs $5 for a chunk of horseradish. And it sits on the table. We look at the horseradish and we'll yotze by looking at it. And we eat the romaine lettuce. We eat the romaine lettuce. There's certainly no mitzvah to get sick on Pesach night. There is a question regarding charoses. Is charoses a mitzvah or not? This is a debate in the days of the Tanoim. So the majority of the Tanoim were of the opinion that charoses is not really a mitzvah Harosis is used for medical purposes. The romaine lettuce or whatever vegetable you're going to use for moror may or may not have worms in it. Now there are kosher worms and non-kosher worms. So the Gemara says these worms are kosher. That's a whole discussion in the Gemara. Which worms are kosher, which worms are not kosher? These worms in the romaine lettuce are kosher, but it's unhealthy to have live worms crawling around in your stomach. So we dip the moror into the charoises for health purposes to kill the worms. You're allowed to kill worms on Shabbos, you're allowed to kill worms on Yom Tov. That's another discussion. How are you permitted? So to shech the behemoth on Yom Tov, we're going to eat the food is mutter. I guess over here also. What do you do if Pesach falls down on Shabbos? You're permitted to kill the worms, that's a problem. So the Gemara says, according to the one opinion, the whole purpose of the charoises has no religious significance whatsoever. Has religious significance. Part of our religion is that we're not allowed to get sick. God gave us a healthy body, so we should take care of the healthy body. So we should dip the moror into charoises in order to kill the worms, in order to stay healthy. This is the one opinion. Then the one Tana, Rab Lezer Rab Tzadok, is of the opinion that charoises is a mitzvah. How can it be a mitzvah? Where does it say in the Chumash? So obviously he didn't mean to say it's a biblical mitzvah. It doesn't say in the Chumash, it's a mitzvah midirabbanan. Why in the world did the rabbis introduce a mitzvah midirabbanan? So the Gemara has three different explanations. They're not sure what the reason for this Tana Rab Lezer Rab Tzadok is. So one reason that's given is that it's to reminisce, it's a zecher to something. That all the three explanations say it's a zecher to reminisce about something. So one view is that it's a zecher litit. We should reminisce about the cement that our ancestors had to use in Egypt in order to build all of those pyramids, in order to build all of those Ori Miskan and Slefarim. The Gemara says to satisfy that opinion, you have to start off with very thick charoises that should be reminiscent of cement. Then the second reason given by the Gemara is that it's zecher l'tapuach, that the men were enslaved in Egypt, the wives were not enslaved, only the males were enslaved. So the men worked all day long, and they had no interest to continue to live, and they didn't want to have any children, and they wanted to commit suicide. They had no cheshik to be with their wives. And the wives, the pasuk says in Shir Hashirim, tachas hatapoch haraticha, the wives would make love to their husbands, and always convince them that tomorrow will be a brighter day, that God will redeem us from Egypt. And if not for the fact that the wives kept on encouraging their husband, the Talmud says, "B'schus nashim tzidkanias nigalavas enim mitzrayim." The wives kept on encouraging the husbands. The wives weren't enslaved, so they weren't suffering to the same extent as the husbands. So they kept on encouraging the husband, let's have babies, let's have a lot of babies, and someday we'll be redeemed from Egypt. So we want to reminisce about the fact that tachas hatapuach haraticha, so that's why the charosas is to reminisce about the tapuach. So that's why many people like to use apples. When the balabastas prepare the charosas, they use apples, thinking incorrectly that the word tapuach means an apple. The Gemara clearly does not understand like that. Tapuach in modern Hebrew means an apple. Tapuach in biblical Hebrew means a citrus fruit. That's what Taisus points out. Tapuach usually means an esrog or some other citrus fruit. And the Gemara says that because this opinion of Rab Lezer Rab Tzadok is that charoises is a mitzvah zecher tapuach, so we should make sure that there's a sharp flavor in the ingredients of the charoises. You have to have sharp flavor. That's citrus fruits all have some acidic flavor to them. So the Gemara says it should be sharp. If it means an apple, the apples don't have any sharp flavor in it. So you have to make sure that if you want to have apples, but you have to make sure that you squeeze in a little orange juice, a grapefruit juice or something. That's what the Gemara says. The charoises should be thick. And one of the ingredients should be a citrus fruit that gives an acidic flavor to it. And the third explanation that's given by the Talmud Yerushalmi, what is the mitzvah of charoises all about? If you hold that it's a mitzvah, what is the mitzvah all about? Midrabanan. It's not zecher l'tapuach, and it's not zecher l'tit, not to reminisce about the cement, but rather zecher l'dam, to reminisce about the fact that so much Jewish blood was spilled in Egypt. So that's why when you have this thick charoises, you should start off, before you dip your moror into the charoises, it should be thick, and then you should pour in red wine, and there should be a lot of liquidy red wine to reminisce about the fact so much Jewish blood was spilled. So in Shulchan Aruch, this is the way it's described. Right before you dip the moror into the charoises, you should pour in a lot of red wine. Unless you live in a community where there's an Alila Saddam, that's the history of the Jewish people. Unless you live in an area where there's a blood libel. There were blood libels all over the world, in every country in the world. They were claiming that the Jews were using Christian blood or Muslim blood, whatever, for the matzahs. So if you live in such a community, so you don't pour red wine into the charoises, you don't look for trouble. But if you live in the Gebenchte America, where there are no blood libels here, so you try to satisfy all the three opinions. Rabbi Soloveitchik was once discussing, someone asked him, how come in all of the paintings of the original sin you have a picture of Adam and Eve is giving an apple to her husband Adam to eat? The Talmud has different suggestions regarding what the sin of the Eitz Hadat, what was the nature of the fruit. Nobody says that it was an apple. One opinion is that it was an esrog, one opinion is that it was grapes, one opinion is that it was te'enim, one opinion is that it was wheat. Nobody says that it was an apple. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said, no, the opinion that it was an esrog, that's in biblical Hebrew, the word esrog is referred to as a tapuach. In modern Hebrew, we use esrog, we use the word tapuach as an apple. So the Christians, who made these paintings, mixed up the one tapuach with the other tapuach. So they always depict the chet of the Eitz Hadat, the original sin, as if it's an apple, but it's not an apple. The tapuach that the Talmud, that the Medrash says, the Eitz Hadat was tapuach, means an esrog. It doesn't mean an apple. So that's the same confusion over here regarding the ingredients in the charoses. How do we paskin? Do we paskin la halacha that the charoses is a mitzvah, it's only for health purposes? So this is a question the Rambam, in his commentary on the Mishnayos, writes one way, and the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah writes differently. The Rambam first wrote the commentary on Mishnayos, and years later he wrote his Mishnah Torah. So in the commentary on Mishnayos, the Rambam says we don't have any Haggadah in existence that has a bracha shekedishana b'mitzvos v'tzivonu al achilas charosos. No Haggadah has such a bracha. So the Rambam writes in his commentary on Mishnayos, obviously that opinion of Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok has not been accepted. We paskin halacha l'maaseh the charosos is only for health purposes. There's no mitzvah even midrabanan. The Rambam in the Mishnah Torah changed his mind. There are, every so often we have a discrepancy between what the Rambam wrote originally in his commentary on Mishnayos as opposed to what he writes in the Mishnah Torah. Every so often we have the Rambam himself change the text in the Pirush HaMishnayos. In Kapach's new edition, there was a Rabbi Yosef Kapach in Eretz Yisrael, passed away a few years ago. So he's famous for many things, and one of the things he's very well known for is he made a new translation of the Rambam's commentary. The commentary on Mishnayos was originally written in Arabic, and it was translated into Hebrew. So the one who did the translation, Ibn Tibban, writes with humility, I don't really know Arabic so well, but I'm going to attempt to write a translation. So it was always assumed that he's writing out of humility. He doesn't know Arabic so well. So Rabbi Kapach says, no, it's not humility. He didn't know Arabic well. So every so often he made a mistake. So every so often Kapach will point out there's a mistake in the translation. Then every so often he'll point out that we have the original manuscript of the Rambam, where the Rambam himself changed his mind. So there's several places, significant changes, several places where the Rambam wrote one way, and then he changed his mind in the Pirush HaMishnayos. And then we have other places he didn't change his mind to change the text in the Pirush HaMishnayos, but when he wrote his Mishnah Torah, when he wrote his big work, Halacha L'Maaseh, so he changed his mind there. So this is one of those cases. The Rambam in the Pirush HaMishnayos writes, we have no Haggadah in the world that has a bracha on charosos. Obviously we haven't accepted the opinion of the Tana that charosos is a mitzvah midrabanan. It's only for health purposes. The Rambam in the Mishnah Torah writes not so. He says it is a mitzvah midrabanan. And nonetheless, you don't recite a bracha. So that's a whole discussion. Why not? How come no bracha is recited? When you perform a mitzvah, whether a mitzvah min Torah, mitzvah rabbanah, we always do recite a bracha. That's another discussion. So one should be, if charosos is not a mitzvah, so it doesn't make a difference what the ingredients are. But if charosos is a mitzvah min rabbanah, so then you have to go through this whole rigmarole. You have to have the thick charosos that should be reminiscent of the cement. And then you have to make sure that you have the acidic flavor that comes from the grapefruits or from the oranges, and then you have to pour in the red wine. If you live in a free country where there's no alilas adam, you have to pour in the red wine and make it slushy with zechal adam. In addition to all of these criteria, the Gaonim, Taisvis quotes from the Gaonim, and this is quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. The Gaonim were before the days of Rashi and Taisvis, before the days of the Rishonim. The Godim had a tradition. They had many traditions from the days of the Talmud, from the days of the Amoraim. The Godim write a tradition that the ingredients in the charosa should be those fruits mentioned in Shir HaShirim that the Jewish people are compared to. So the Jewish people are compared to almonds, pomegranates, dates. So when you get your charosis in the mail from the Telz Yeshiva in Cleveland, that stuff that's sticky and no one enjoys it, that's the real McCoy. That's the real ingredients that the charosis are supposed to have. Then you add on a couple of other things also. But that's to satisfy this tradition from the Gaon. Exactly what he's supposed to do with the charosis. So everybody knows what you do. You dip in the maror. A lot of people make a mistake. They pile on a lot of charosis and they eat the maror with charosis. The Gemara says you have to shake off all of the charosis. If you eat the maror with the charosis, you're not yotze in the mitzvah maror. You have to eat matzah separately. If you eat matzah with applesauce, you're not yotze. You have to eat the matzah separately. You have to eat the maror separately. Whenever you have a mitzvah b'achila, you're not supposed to eat it with anything that doesn't belong. So you're supposed to shake off the extra charosis. Is there a mitzvah to eat charosis? We usually assume there's no mitzvah to eat charosis. A mitzvah, whatever, if you assume that it's a mitzvah to dip the maror into the charosis. So the Rambam that we mentioned before in the commentary to the Mishnayos, in all the translations from the Arabic of his commentary, he writes, we don't accept that opinion of the Tana charosis as a mitzvah, and the proof is because in no Haggadah does it appear such a bracha, sheker shanas hasatzimanu, al achilas charosis. Al achilas charosis? Even if the old charosis is a mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah to eat the charosis, it's a mitzvah to dip the maror into the charosis, zechel adam, zechel tapuch, zechel atit. So the Rambam apparently thinks that according to this view of the Tana, that charosis is a mitzvah, it's a mitzvah in the Rabbanan to eat a kazais of charosis. On the Shulchan Aruch they mentioned such a practice, and the Ramah says we don't do like that. But apparently there was such a practice years ago. Then in addition to dipping the maror into the charosis, you have to also eat a kazais of charosis separately. One of the big mitzvahs on Pesach night is to drink arbikosis. Arbikosis of wine. That's how the Gemara says, arbikosis of wine. What if one doesn't want to use wine? What if you want to use grape juice? Many people like to use grape juice all year long for Kiddush and Havdalah. So this was a big debate in America years ago, during the Prohibition years, just before I was born. During the Prohibition years, it was against the law to produce alcoholic beverages unless it was necessary for sacramental purposes. So the Jews were all manufacturing wine, and they said it's necessary for Kiddush and Havdalah, for arbikosis. So the first prominent figure among the Jews who said that it's not necessary that you can use grape juice was Professor Louis Ginsburg from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. He was not known as an Orthodox practicing rabbi. He was a big scholar. He wrote many books that many people use, Legends of the Jews and other books. But he was not known as, in observance, he was not known as an Orthodox person. So he massed to the government, he published this tshuva, that they shouldn't allow the Jews to manufacture wine because they can be yotze just as well with grape juice, the Kiddush and Havdalah. And he quotes the passages in the Gemara. The Gemara says, and it's a halacha l'maisa, it comes up, let's say a person is out of town for business and he gets stuck for Shabbos and he can't come back. The winds are too high and the planes are not leaving, and sure, he got stuck for Shabbos in some place. He can't get any kosher wine for Shabbos. So the Gemara says, no problem. Go to the store, buy some grapes, squeeze out the grapes, and sure, you make Kiddush on the grape juice. You can't squeeze out the grapes on Shabbos. I mean, squeeze out the grapes on Erev Shabbos. It's a malacha to squeeze out grapes. To squeeze out the grapes on Erev Shabbos, and you have grape juice. So many of the poskim write the grape juice is considered yayin, and say bar piagofen. That's only if the grape juice was not treated chemically, and if you would let it sit long enough, it would ferment and turn into wine. But the grape juice that we have today is cooked, and then is treated chemically in such a way that it's never going to ferment, it's never going to turn into wine. It may spoil, but it's not going to ferment, it's not going to turn into wine. So years ago, the big posek in New York City before Moshe Feinstein appeared on the scene, the big posek was Rabbi Henkin, of Eliyahu Yosef Henkin. So he published the tshuva that grape juice is not considered bar piagofen, it's shahakal. There were other prominent rabbanim also who felt like that. And originally, when Professor Louis Ginsburg came out with his tshuva in Hebrew that grape juice is acceptable, the overwhelming majority of the rabbanim did not agree with him. The overwhelming majority held like Rav Henkin that grape juice is just plain old shahakal. The one who made it acceptable was Hagon Matzadik Moshe Feinstein. He said that grape juice is acceptable. In fact, it's a little bit humorous. Rav Moshe Feinstein, when he passed away, so they had different people deliver hespedim at his funeral. The funeral in New York was on Tainus Esther, and the funeral in Eretz Yisrael was on Purim. So I remember one of the Maspidim delivered a talk. He was saying how great Rav Moshe Feinstein was that even the Pope followed the Pesachim of Rav Moshe Feinstein. People didn't know what he was talking about. So he was explaining they had a shaila because in the church, part of their Avodah Zarah ritual is that they use wine and they use a wafer, and after they recite their incantation, which people make fun of, they call it hocus pocus because it's a Latin incantation that sounds like hocus pocus. So after they recite their prayers or whatever, so they believe, according to their religion, that the wine converts to become the blood of Yoshke, and the wafer converts to become the flesh. So this is actually the flesh and blood of their God, and the Pasuk say, according to their belief, that becomes Avodah Zarah. It's not that it's the Kruvas Avodah Zarah, it's actual Avodah Zarah itself. So they had a shayla whether the Christians had a shayla, they permitted to substitute grape juice instead of wine. So they were pilpulling for a long time. So someone brought it to the attention of the Pope that Rav Moshe Feinstein said that grape juice is acceptable. So this was brought up in the Hesped for Rav Moshe Feinstein. Even the Pope in the Vatican accepted the Pesach. I thought it would be nicer if they say, even the Rabbanim in Canada, even the Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, all over the world, to say the Pope accepted the Pesach. I thought it was a little ridiculous. I remember the same Aspid spoke about even the judge in Philadelphia. There was a shayla about, there were Siamese twins who were born to a couple. The husband was learning in yeshiva in Philadelphia. They had Siamese twins and they couldn't both survive. So one of them stood a chance of surviving, the other one did not. So the question was, are they allowed to separate the babies and such? But they're going to be killing one of the babies so that the other one would stand the chance to survive. So the shayla was whether they were permitted to do this. So it was a question that was brought up in civil court in Philadelphia. So the judge said he's waiting for the Pesach of Rav Moshe Feinstein. So this was also mentioned. The same one who said about how great Rav Moshe was that the Pope followed his Pesach. He said also that the judge in Philadelphia, I didn't see why there was such a great godless. The Shikara judge in Philadelphia listened to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Why didn't he say that all the rabbis all over the world listened to Rav Moshe Feinstein? Anyway, so Rav Moshe Feinstein was the one who said it's acceptable that even though the grape juice is treated chemically in such a way that it'll never turn into, it'll never ferment, it'll never turn into wine, nonetheless, grape juice is grape juice and it's Bor Piagofen, so you can use it for Kiddush. Rav Moshe Feinstein, however, writes in his Sefer, he thinks that you cannot use the grape juice for Arba Kosos on Pesach night. Because Arba Kosos means you're drinking a toast, you're drinking l'chaim. You don't make a toast over tomato juice or over orange juice. You make a toast over something that has some alcoholic content to it. Has some spunk to it. That's an ishkin toast. It's not a l'chaim. So Moshe was the one who said that the grape juice is considered Bor Piagofen. You can use it for Kiddush and Havdalah, but he's the one who says that you shouldn't use it for Arba Kosos. So it's questionable. It's problematic. Rabbi Soloveitchik, in his later years, was not that healthy. The last couple of years of his life, so he personally used to use grape juice for the Arba Kosos also. He thought it's even preferable. The Rambam says that the Arba Kosos should be a pleasant tasting drink. So Rav Soloveitchik used to say in the yeshiva, if a person enjoys grape juice more than he enjoys wine, so it's preferable that he should use the grape juice for the Arba Kosos. It's supposed to be a shtiya reva, a pleasant tasting drink. But it's really questionable. Moshe Feinstein thought that it was not acceptable. Regarding the matzah on Pesach night, the Gemara says that it has to be shmura matzah. What does it mean, shmura matzah? So the Gemara has two levels of understanding, two aspects to it. First of all, it has to be baked lishma, it has to be made lishma. And it's only considered baked lishma if the baking process is done by someone who's obligated to fulfill a mitzvah. A non-Jew will bake the matzah, so he can think from today till next year that this is for the Jews to use for their mitzvah. That's not called lishma. Only one who's obligated in the mitzvah can create lishma. Same thing, you have to write a get lishma. So the Gemara says a non-Jew who doesn't have a din of a get cannot create lishma by a get. Or if you hold that you have to put up a sukkah lishma, the Shammai's opinion, so if a non-Jew will construct this sukkah, that's not considered lishma. Whatever you need lishma, it can only be created, the lishma can only be created by one who is obligated in that mitzvah. The mazel is that women are mechuyev to eat matzah just to the same extent as the men. Throughout all the years, the women used to bake the matzahs, like all year long. The women baked the chalas, Shabbos and Yom Tov, so the women used to bake the matzahs for Pesach also. So the mazel is that the women are mechuyev in the mitzvah of matzah. It really should have been a mitzvah saseh as magra, but women should have been exempt. So the Gemara learns that from a pasuk that this is an exception to the rule that women are obligated to eat matzah. If the women would have been part of the mitzvah, they wouldn't be able to bake the matzah. A cotton before bar mitzvah, a child before bar mitzvah is not mechuyev min haTorah to eat matzah. So children cannot participate in the baking of matzah. They cannot pour the water, they cannot knead the dough, they can't participate in anything. The only thing they can participate, if you always have little children before bar mitzvah, like to go help bake matzah, so the only thing we allow them to do is to scream out that everyone who's doing the work should have in mind l'shem mitzvahs matzah. So we allow them to scream that out. A non-Jew can scream that also. You can have signs up that everyone should have in mind. That's not the asiyas matzah. But every aspect of the baking of the matzah, the pouring of the water and the kneading of the dough and the rolling it out and making the holes with the raider and so on, every step of the asiyas matzah has to be done by a Jewish individual who's past bar mitzvah, either a man or a woman. It cannot be done by a couple. In Europe, there was a big debate regarding machine matzah, whether machine matzah was acceptable. Today, when you look at the machines, you go to a factory where they bake the matzahs, so we don't understand what in the world the Rabbanim were talking about. What's the problem with the machine matzahs? There are students from America who go to Vilna to teach Torah. They're balabatim interested in learning there. So they saw the machines that they're talking about. There's no similarity living at that to the machines that we have today that bake the matzahs. The machine matzah in Europe meant they mixed the water with the flour by hand, and then they kneaded everything out. They flattened it out by hand. And then they had a machine to make nice-sized square shapes of matzahs. So it took twice as long, took 3 times as long to make these machine matzahs. Not that the process from the beginning to the end was done by machine, like today. The machine matzahs takes much less time than the hand matzahs. But when they first had the machine matzahs in Europe, in Eastern Europe, it was taking much longer. So the Rabbanim said, you're not allowed to do that. There's a Mishnah that says in Sochem that you're not allowed to have, when sometimes women make cookies. So they have a mold, they have a shape. So they want to have all the cookies should be in the shape of a dreidel or the shape of a megillah, whatever. So they put this mold, they flatten out the dough, and then they put the mold on, and they have everything exactly the same size. So the Mishnah says that you're not allowed to do that for Pesach because it's going to take extra time to make this special design, and extra time may turn into chametz while you're making your fancy design. So that's what the Rabbanim was screaming about, that the machine matzah could be that it turned into chametz because it takes much longer. But today, that's not really an issue. Fakir, the machine matzah is made much quicker than the hand matzah, and there are many who insist dafka on using the old timers in Yerushalayim will insist dafka on machine matzah. They don't want to use hand matzah. So the Vechik family insists dafka on machine matzah, not to use hand matzah. Many like that because it's a much shorter process of baking. There was a debate. The din is that the matzah has to be baked l'shma. So it means it has to be my pu'ula, my action. I bake the matzah, and I'm Jewish, and I'm baking it l'shma. I'm mechuyev in the mitzvah matzah. I'm baking the matzah l'shma. So when I push a button, I walk away, and I start reading a newspaper. Can you really declare that the baking of all the matzahs is done by me, or do you say it happened by itself? It didn't happen by itself, but the question is, al pi halacha, is it considered? Does the baking of the matzah relate back to me or not? So one of the gedolim in Europe, who died in the middle of the Second World War, the Kovner Rav, he died before the Nazis had a chance to murder him. He writes in his Chuvas, he thinks based on the description that the Gemara gives, that if you have any machine and you push a button, he's not talking about matzahs, he's talking about filling the water in a mikveh, a different issue, but it's the same principle. So he says, based on his understanding of the Gemara, if you would push a button, and a little bit would be accomplished if you would let the machinery run for half a minute, and then you push a button and you stop. So whatever would have been accomplished in the first half a minute or so, that relates back to me, that's considered as if I did it. But with the fact that it keeps on filling more water, the fact that it keeps on baking more matzahs, that's koyach sheni. The Gemara distinguishes between koyach rishon and koyach sheni. And whatever continues to work, and I walk to the side and I start reading a newspaper, I start learning or something else, so that doesn't relate back to me. No. If you push a button on a matzah machine and you stop the machinery a minute later, you have nothing. Nothing will be baked. Nothing is baked in half a minute. It takes a couple of minutes to bake the first matzah. So according to the Kovner Rav, none of the matzahs are called asiyah l'shma. It's not lacking my asiyah. It's not considered as if I did it. his opinion, he was a great Goyen, his opinion was not accepted. The Chazon Ish writes in his Sefer not so, and the Kozher Glover, who was killed by the Nazis, also writes not so. Many of the Gdolim, they write that that's not the correct understanding of the passage in the Gemara, and when you push a button and everything is all set up, and everything, all these matzahs are going to be baking for the next 10 hours, going to keep on baking matzahs, the whole thing relates back to me, and it's considered my asiyah. Unless sometimes when you go to the matzah factory, unless sometimes what happens is you push a button and it's going to bake matzah, it has enough water, flour, everything is all set up, it'll continue baking for the next 5 hours. But if you want it to bake more than 5 hours, someone has to add some more water. So then you have to make sure that the one who adds the water is a Jewish person, and he adds the water over there in the other container, and he says, I'm adding the water, l'shem mitzvahs matzah. You can't say that when I push the button, I say l'shem mitzvahs matzah, the whole baking of everything for all 10 hours relates back to me. When I pushed the button, there wasn't enough water for 10 hours. There's only enough water for 5 hours. So that's called kololo chitzav. The Gemara has an expression. You can't say ishim shem chitzav over there. So that's the way it's done in all of the matzah factories. So there again, there are two aspects to shmur matzah. One is that the baking has to be done l'shma. And the second aspect is that it has to be shmura. You have to watch the grain to make sure that it didn't turn into chametz. So from what point on do you have to start watching the grain that it shouldn't have turned into chametz? So the Gemara says, strictly speaking, it's theoretically possible, very far-fetched, theoretically it's possible that the grain turned into chametz while it's still attached to the ground. The Gemara talks about such a thing. Achmetz ben mechuber. It turned, let's say, if you have a big puddle of water, and the kernels of grain are sitting in this puddle of water, it is possible that usually when it rains, the water from the rain gets absorbed in the ground, and the kernels of grain are not sitting in a puddle of water. But it is theoretically possible for kernels of grain to turn into chametz while it's still attached to the ground. So the Gemara says that's so far-fetched, you don't have to worry about that. If when they're taking the kernels of grain and grinding them up in order to make flour, in order to bake the matzahs, if they'll find kernels of grain that they think turned into chametz, so they'll reject them, they'll throw them out. But you don't have to be worried about that. You don't have to put the cover over all of the kernels, all the grain while it's growing on the ground. So the Gemara has this debate from what point on in the process do you have to watch that the grain does not turn into chametz. So the machmir opinion in the Gemara, the chumra opinion in the Gemara, the most strict opinion is from the time shmura mishas ketzira, from the time that it detached the kernels of grain from the ground, because there's more of a chance. While it's attached to the ground, there's a very slight chance that it's going to turn into chametz. Once you detach it, there's more of a chance. More of a chance that it's going to turn into chametz is when you mix the flour with the water. So that's the psak. You have to have shmura mishas lisha, from the time that you mix it with water. But in Shulchan Aruch, they recommend that one should be machmir to have shmura mishas ketzira. Shmura mishas ketzira, of course, is much more expensive. So most of the Jews in America, I guess some in Canada as well, most of the Jews do not buy shmura matzah. They buy regular matzah. So strictly speaking, the regular matzah is also good. Mishas hatak, the regular matzah is also good. Shmura mishas lisha, from the time that they knead the dough. The only problem is that the matzah has to be baked l'shma. So originally, when they started the matzah companies in America, so the Rabbanim, Rabbi Eliezer Silva, and the other Rabbanim insisted they should bake all of the matzahs l'shem mitzvahs matzah, because the overwhelming majority of the Jews in America and Canada are going to use regular matzah. They're not going to use shmura matzah mishas ketzira. So when they push the button and they bake all the matzahs, they bake everything l'shem mitzvahs matzah. Those who know the din, Shulchan Aruch, so more correct is to be machmir to buy the shmura mishas ketzira. And then you have the two practices, whether it's preferable to use dafka hand-made matzah, because that's really the shma, or should you say that machine matzah is also acceptable, and if it's acceptable, maybe it's even to be preferred, because the machine matzah is made in a much shorter period of time than the hand matzah. So that's the two different practices. We have we have another mitzvah. All of these midrabanan, we have another mitzvah. Every Pesach night, we recite Hallel in conjunction with the eating of the Korban Pesach. That's how the Mishnah says. HaPesach ton Hallel ba'achi losa. What does it mean? As you're eating the Korban Pesach, you recite the Hallel. The Gemara says you're not allowed to talk while you eat. It's not healthy. So obviously it does mean that you recite Hallel while you're chewing on the Korban Pesach. So the rabbis set up a system in the days of the Beis Hamikdash, when they used to have Korban Pesach. The Shammai Beis Hillel, I quoted in the Mishnah, as disagreeing exactly on the details here. We split the Hallel in half. Part of the Hallel is recited before the meal, part of the Hallel is recited after the meal, and we eat the Korban Pesach in the middle. There's Mancha Beis HaMikdash Hayikayim, they would eat the Korban Pesach in the middle. Each unit of the Hallel is concluded with a bracha. The first unit of the Hallel before the meal, we conclude with the bracha Shev Yolana V'Golas Avasenu Mitzrayim V'Gyanu Alayla Zeh, etc., etc. Baruch Atah Hashem Goal Yisrael. And then the second half of the Hallel, which is recited after the benching, after the whole meal is all over, after we complete the Hallel, then the Mishnah says we conclude the second half of the Hallel with the Birchas Hashir. What bracha is that? What bracha is called Birchas Hashir? So the Gemara records two different traditions. Apparently there were two different minhagim. And the Gemara says they're both nice ideas and we should say both. What are the two traditions? So one version, one tradition had it. See, Rabbi Yehuda, every so often, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi is the one who edited the Mishnayos. He didn't write the Mishnayos. So every so often when there would be two existing traditions, he would write the Mishnah, he would edit the Mishnah and present it in such a vague fashion that you can interpret either tradition. The Mishnah was written in such a way that to preserve both traditions. So here the Mishnah writes a vague expression. The second half of the Hallel that's recited after the conclusion of the benching, after the meal is over, should be ended, should be concluded with the Birchas Hashir. What bracha is Birchas Hashir? So we don't know what it is. So there were two traditions. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi picked an expression, Birchas Hashir. Each one should follow his tradition. And the Gemara says that both ideas, so we say both. So one tradition had it, like we do all year long. Whenever you finish Hallel, Rosh Chodesh or Ayant, we say a paragraph, Yahaluch Hashem Makeh Kol Maasecha, Baruch Atah Hashem, Melech Mecholol Batish B'Chaz, that little paragraph. So that's one opinion. That's the Birchas Hashir. The other opinion in the Gemara is no, Birchas Hashir is Nishmas Kol Chai through Yishtabach. That's how we conclude Sukkah de Zimra on Shabbos and Yom Tov. On a regular weekday, we start Sukkah de Zimra with Baruch Shama and we end with Yishtabach. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, Yishtabach is a longer bracha. That's what it says in the Chayodim. He quotes from the Vilna Gaon. If someone comes late to shul, so unfortunately they teach us in Yeshiva Ktana, if you come late to the davening, you have to abridge the Pesukah de Zimra. So the quick version is Baruch Shama Ashrei Yishtabach. So on Shabbos and Yom Tov, the Chayodim quotes from the Vilna Gaon, you cannot abridge it so much. You have to say Baruch Shama Ashrei Nishmas through Yishtabach. Because on Shabbos and Yom Tov, the bracha of Yishtabach begins from Nishmas. The Gemara refers to that long bracha as Birchas Hashir, the longer version of Yishtabach. So just like Nishmas Kol Chai through Yishtabach is the bracha that we recite at the conclusion of the Pesukah de Zimra on Shabbos and Yom Tov, so the other opinion, the other tradition in the Gemara, recorded in the Gemara, is that at the conclusion of the second half of the Hallel, after the meal on Pesach night, we should recite Birchas Hashem, means that we should recite from Nishmas Kol Chai through Yishtabach, and yeah. So the Gemara says they're both nice ideas. We'll do both. We say both. What exactly does that mean that you say both? So the Rashbam has in his commentary on the Gemara. Rashbam is Rashi's grandson. The end of Pesach, we don't have any Rashi. You have the Rashbam writes in his commentary. You literally say both. When you finish the Hallel, you say Hallelujah. And then you say the 26 Kili Olam Chazdas, that chapter in Tehillim. And then you say Nishmas Kol Chai through Yishtabach. You have even, I'm sure, I got in the mail, I'm sure you got in the mail from distant orphanage home or whatever hospital it is, Laniada Hospital or something. Every year they send some Haggadah, so they reprint old Haggadahs. So there were communities in Europe where they followed the opinion of the Rashbam. They said two brachas. They said Hallelujah at the end of the Hallel, then they said the 26 Kili Olam Chazdas, and they said Nishmas with Yishtabach. In the last few centuries, nobody follows that opinion. So even though this was a legitimate Haggadah, that the people followed such a practice years ago, but today nobody follows that opinion to say two brachas at the end of the Hallel on Pesach night. You say Hallelujah and Nishmas Kol Chai, that's out of the question. So by the time it came in the Shulchan Aruch, it was written in the 1500s, so it boiled down to Minig Ashkenaz and Minig Sfarad. There are two minhagim. No one follows the Rashbam anymore. Tosfos, the contemporaries of the Rashbam were not happy with his opinion. The Balei Tosfos, the brothers of the Rashbam, the nephews, all the Balei Tosfos, they were all cousins and so on. So no one agreed with the Rashbam. So for many centuries already, nobody says two brachas at the conclusion of the Hallel. The only question is, how do you combine these two? How do you say both Hallelujah and Nishmas? So in the Shulchan Aruch, they recommend that every family has to make up its mind in advance whether you're going to daven the daven nusach Ashkenaz, daven nusach Sfarad. The Sfardim daven nusach Sfarad, and the Hasidim have adopted to say Nusach Sfarad. And Ashkenazim, who are not Hasidim, usually daven Nusach Ashkenaz. So you have to make up your mind in advance. It's quite possible and quite likely that you have 5 or 10 Haggadahs in the house that they're not all the same Nusach. Could be that half of them will be Nusach Ashkenaz and half will be Nusach Sfarad. So you should make up, you should vote, or whatever. You should decide in advance whether you're going to daven, whether you're going to say Nusach Ashkenaz, Nusach Sfarad. And everyone should follow that Nusach. So Nusach Ashkenaz goes more or less in order. When you finish the Hallel, then you say the Bracha Yehalelucha, up until and not including the last line. You don't say Baruch Atah Shemach Mechalal Batush B'chutz. You say Halucha up until and not including the last bracha. And then you say the 26 Psukim Kili Yom Chazda. Then you say Nishmas Kol Chai, and you conclude with Yishtabach. You finish, you go in order. And Nusach Sfarad goes backwards and forwards. Nusach Sfarad has you finish Hallel and you don't say Hallelujah. Then you say the 26 Psukim Kili Yom Chazda. Then you say Nishmas Kol Chai with Yishtabach up until the last line, not including the bracha. And then you go back and you say Hallelujah all the way at the end. So that's Nusach Sfarad. Nusach Ashkenaz has everything straight. You have your Hallelujah right after the Hallel, up until and not including the last line. Then you say Nishmas till the end of Yishtabach. So every family should make up in advance whether they're going to daven Nusach Ashkenaz and Nusach Sfarad. And everyone should recite the same Nusach. That's the issue of reciting Hallel in the Seder. The Talmud Yerushalmi and the Shulchan Aruch quotes a practice to recite Hallel in Shul. On the first 2 nights of Pesach, that they recite Hallel in Shul right after Ma'ariv, before the Chazan says Kaddish Tiskabel, the whole tzibur says a bracha, you cross a Hallel, and they recite Hallel. So the Balei HaTaisus say, no, we don't have that practice. That's because they were Amei Ha'aretz. They didn't have Haggadah. They didn't know how to say Hallel in the middle of the Seder. So they got to say Hallel on Pesach night. So since they weren't able to say it at home, so they said it in Shul. But we, Kolon Chachamim, Kolon the Barim, Kolon Isken, we know how to say Hallel. We don't have to say Hallel in Shul. We say Hallel in the Haggadah, half before the meal, half after the meal, and there's no need to say Hallel in Shul. That's what Taisus writes. That's what the Ramah writes. And Rabbi Yosef Kara writes, the minig Sfarad was, no, you say Hallel in Shul. Over the years, there were many Ashkenazim who followed the practice of the Sfardim, who did say Hallel in Shul. So the Vilna Gaon said Hallel in Shul, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik said Hallel in Shul. So there are many Ashkenazi shuls where they have adopted this practice to recite Hallel in Shul on the first 2 nights of Pesach. Rav Soloveitchik used to encourage the Musmachim of the yeshiva to introduce it in the shul, unless they're afraid it's going to make a whole world war. If you have Yekis in your shul, it'll make a world war. They don't go for any shinuyim whatsoever. But if you don't have Yekis, and the rabbi can explain to the Balabatim why it's in place, so there's what to discuss. But it's not worth making a machlekes over. The Mishnah records the din that you have to finish eating the Korban Pesach, as Mansha Beis Hamikdash Hayekayim. You have to finish eating the Korban Pesach by midnight, by Chatzos. The Gemara points out that this was always the practice, but there was a dispute in the days of the Tanoim whether this is a din min haTorah, a din min derabbanan. Rabbi Kiva's opinion is that it's only min derabbanan. Rabbi Elazar ben Azari's opinion is that this is a din min haTorah. How can it be min haTorah? Where does it say in the Chumash that you have to finish by Chatzos? It says v'achlas habasa b'layla hazeh. B'layla hazeh is all night long. So one Tana says no. The phrase b'layla hazeh has the connotation of Chatzos. So we have another pasuk that says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "V'avarta be'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla hazeh v'kesi kol b'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim." Makas b'choros will occur at the exact moment of Chatzos. So just like over there, the expression b'layla hazeh has the connotation of Chatzos. Not connotation, it says so. V'avarta be'eretz b'layla hazeh v'kesi kol b'chor. That's going to be at Chatzos. So too, Achilas Korban Pesach has to be before Chatzos. What's the difference halacha l'maisa, whether Chatzos is a din min haTorah, Chatzos is a din min derabbanan? So the Gemara writes in the end, towards the very end of the Masechta Pesach, and the Gemara says the difference will be, what about Bizman Hazeh? If you hold Chatzos is only min derabbanan because of the Gzeirah, why do they introduce such a din min derabbanan? Because if you'll permit people to eat the Korban Pesach all night long, they may eat the Korban Pesach an hour before sunrise. An hour before sunrise is already after Alos HaShachar. So it's an Issa Koris to eat the Korban Pesach. It'll be Nosar if you eat Nosar. It's an Onush Koris. So Kedei Laharchik Kasadam and Avera, to prevent people from violating an Issa of eating Nosar, So they made a chumrah, you're not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach after midnight, so you won't be anywhere near Chatzos. You won't be anywhere near Alos HaShachar. So if that's the reason, so the Gemara says it only applies to the Korban Pesach. You're going to eat matzah after Alos HaShachar, so there's no Isa Noisar. What's the biggest Avera? He's eating before davening, he's eating before Shacharis. No, the world doesn't come to an end. The Bavit should always eat before Shacharis. The world doesn't come to an end if you eat before Shacharis. You'll be saying a bracha levatol. Sheikh Hashem says al achilas matzah. The bracha levatol is only with the Rabbanon, we assume. So they're not going to make a gzera with the Rabbanon to insist everyone has to finish eating the matzah before Chatzos. The Avera is that he'll possibly violate if he eats the matzah after Alos HaShachar will not be that serious an Avera. But if you hold the Chatzos is a Dimin HaTorah, then the Gemara says it applies to all the mitzvahs halaylas. You have to finish the whole Haggadah, you have to finish the whole Arba Kosos before Chatzos, before midnight. Echad Miyodeya and Chad Gadya, that's not part of the Haggadah, that you can sing all night long. But you should finish all Arba Kosos by midnight. So how do we paskin? Do we accept the view that Chatzos is min HaTorah, Chatzos is min Rabbanon? So Tosfos is not sure. Tosfos has two opinions. There is a significant minority opinion in Tosfos that Chatzos is a din min HaTorah, and you have to finish the whole Arba Kosos by Chatzos. So that's why the Shulchan Aruch recommends that if possible, one should proceed with the Haggadah at a decent pace. You have a lot of grandchildren, and every grandchild is going to say all of his Rashi Tevis and all his Gematrios and all of his Pshetlos, so you don't stand the chins. And try to finish everything by Chatzos. We'll close with this. One of the things that we celebrate on Pesach night, we celebrate in commemoration of Yetzias Mitzrayim that occurred in the past, and we're celebrating in anticipation of the Geula HaSidah. When we say Nishmas Kol Chai Tevarach Hashimcha, we are praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the day should come that we should celebrate the Geula of all of mankind. We'll set this on Pesach night. Pesach night is supposed to celebrate Yetzias Mitzrayim. So Rashi in his commentary on Chumash points out when Moshe Rabbeinu was given the prophecy from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he's going to redeem the Jewish people, so Moshe Rabbeinu says he's going to come to the Jewish people, they're going to ask me, Mashmo, what is the name of God? What am I supposed to say? So God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell him, Eker Asher Eker. What does that mean? So Rashi quotes from the Medrash, I will be with the Jewish people in this Golus, I will redeem them, and Eliyamayim, I will be with the Jewish people in the future, and I will redeem all of mankind. It will be a Geula HaSidah. So because this prophecy was told to Moshe Rabbeinu right before Yetzias Mitzrayim, so every year on Pesach night, we celebrate in commemoration of the Geulas Mitzrayim, in anticipation of the Geula HaSidah that's going to be in the future. So that's why we recite Nishmas Kol Chai on Pesach night. This Geula HaSidah, however, is only going to work if all of mankind, Nishmas Kol Chai, Tevarach Hashimcha, if all of mankind will recognize the kingdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What do you do if there's some Akshanim? There's some Russia in South Africa, there's a Russia in Europe, there's a Russia in Asia. There's always some Russia, some government who won't recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so we'll never have a Geula HaSidah. So that's why we pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shvoi Chamos Chalagam Shelo Yedocha. It's not fair that because of some minority government over here, over there, the other place, they don't want to recognize the kingdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's going to hold back the Geula HaSidah. So we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's not fair. Shvoi Chamos Chalagam Shelo Yedocha. Get rid of those people, and then we'll have all of the nations, the world will be recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then we'll be able to sing Nishmas Kol Chai. May we all be zoichet to see this year, possibly this year, the Geula that was promised to Moshe Rabbeinu before Yetzias Mitzrayim, that it'll be tak and Nishmas Kol Chai Tevarach Hashem. Good news. Good for you.
Once again, it was a great pleasure and great honor for our shul to be able to have Rav Schachter with us this morning. We again want to thank Mizrahi, we want to thank the Yeshiva University, Torah Mitzion Kollel, and for everyone for coming and joining with us this morning. Just in conclusion, sadly some news for those who didn't hear about the passing of Izzy Kaplan, Israel Kaplan. The Levaya will be in Eretz Yisrael, but there will be a Hespedium at Congregation B'nai Torah at noon today, just a few minutes from now. Those who knew Izzy knew he was a great Jew, an ardent Zionist, really a very important member of our community in many ways, and certainly to participate in this Kavod Achron is certainly something that we should all make an attempt to do. Once again, we'd like to thank Rav Schachter for his words, and wish everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach.